I feel compelled to honor, once again, the hundreds of people who have really led to where we are today, as this is the 10th anniversary. And so I thought I'd share some personal reflections, kind of the journey. I've tried to give a number of different voices. I'll share a few more along the way. This, again, has been a massive collaboration, continues, and I love Joe's story. He's accumulating experts from around the world that are replicating the model that we did with the heart, each bringing a different piece to the puzzle, and all of a sudden you're starting to see it come together because it's all registered to the same foundation, the same human eye in that case. And so, so the first thing is the celebration of the birthday. It's the 10th birthday, but that actually was not a birthday cake for the project. It was, I don't know where Dr. Ananda Sabapathy is, but she actually surprised me. I was visiting Baylor College of Medicine, and she surprised me on my birthday. So even though you could argue that it is the birthday of the living heart, there it is 10 years ago that honored in the cake. But in fact, it was at a surprise. And the most interesting thing about that surprise, and some of you may recognize in the background, is actually my daughter, who is at Baylor College of Medicine doing her residency. In fact, she's chief resident of the pediatric neurodegenerative neurology program at Baylor College of Medicine. So I was surprised on my birthday by both the cake and my daughter. And for those of you who know, my daughter has played a role. So going back to 2013, I like to share this slide. And again, this was at the preview event where I shared with some notable people, someone who's spoken. I don't think I have that video of Dr. Julius Guccione, who was one of the key founders. And in fact, you would have noticed his name on Matthias's slide, one of the inventors of material model years ago. And the thing about this slide that I bring out is a couple of things. One, I talked about the focus, and you heard my video about the reason we focus was the domain, but my vision was eventually to go beyond that. But it was key that we stayed focused because that would do it. The other part, and we've heard it a few times, is this was not a science experiment. We were end goal, it was transitional research. We wanted to make sure we started with the end in mind, that we were patient-centric. And more importantly, and I use that image to carry the key message that our goal was not to go off and reinvent the wheel, that we were going to try to assemble the knowledge that has been created and then accumulate it, share it out in a sort of crowdsource model, and then build on it from there so everyone could benefit. And that model has served us very well over that time because people recognize the power of working with others and the accumulation, sort of the snowball effect, which doesn't always happen in science. Often scientists are a little bit competitive. And so to be able to bring them together and say, you know what, if we work together, we can do better. And so that was a key part of it. So, and so here is, I actually have Eliezer Edelman and sharing his hopes. I mentioned his, let me just play this video quickly for you from 2015 now, his view.
Computational modeling is entering every aspect of medicine, biology, science, and technology. It does at least three very important things. It helps us design the next new thing. It helps us understand how the body works, and it's going to be a tool that clinicians use to decide what the optimal therapy is for each specific patient.
We focused specifically on modeling the heart because cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of people worldwide. So we stuck to a particular community, but we know that each of the body's organs has its own community. We expect organ by organ, each of these communities will step up and say, well, if the heart team can do it, then maybe we, the brain team, can do it, and people who focus on the liver can do it. And slowly but surely, the entire body will be modeled.
Computational modeling will be an essential part of everything we do as clinicians and scientists. It will be embedded in hospitals and in laboratories. We've advanced from a static X-ray to three-dimensional reconstructions. Now imagine if we could intervene virtually and show the physician and the patient what would happen if we do this operation, this intervention, this insertion and implantation. This is all going to be part of the medicine of the future, and the future is not so far away. It's in our lifetime.
But not only is it in our lifetime, but you're beginning to hear, and you'll hear tomorrow, it's happening now. And so that vision has been realized. And that's a real attribution to the contents and the community that has really come together. So as I alluded to earlier, I've tried to keep the patients in mind throughout the whole thing. And we'll hear a little bit more from patients tomorrow. I'd like to share some patient stories, at least the patient perspective. And so the first example, and this is a case, this was a really interesting interaction that I had, and we heard earlier that in the MediTwin project, one of the focuses is going to be focused on a treatment of HLHS, which is the Norwood procedure. And I did something very interesting back in 2017, I think this was. I invited Dr. Christian Schlenzak to join me on stage at one of our forums when I was presenting the project early on in 2017. I'd never met him before. He had not seen the technology. I invited him basically cold to share exactly what he felt to the world as he felt, without rehearsal, without anything. Some people would say that's a little risky. But I felt I needed to know his honest opinion. And it was being streamed, so it was recorded. You can actually find this. And I actually have his words here from that interaction.
So we just met for the first time today. Based on what you've learned today about where we're going with this technology and the challenges you face on an everyday basis, do you have some ideas on how this technology might help you?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I'm amazed about your talk. It's the first time I've seen that presentation, and I can tell you that heart model you have presented looks so real. It really looks real. It looks real, and I think it will make us in the near future much more easy looking inside the heart prior a surgery. It will help if I want to repair a really complex congenital malformation. This is if a baby comes to the world with, for example, only one chamber, heart chamber, instead of two heart chambers, and one vessel, one main vessel, the aorta, is hypoplastic. Then it's very difficult and tough for the surgeon to fix that, you can imagine. It's very difficult to get the right dimensions in order to shape the vessel to form a new valve into this 3-kilo baby. If we would have the technology to plan our strategy and probably to shape our devices we need in this particular small baby, if it's a patch material, this is artificial material, if we're able to shape and design it prior to surgery, this definitely will help to get extreme better results. And this is my wish for this technology.
Okay, and now the most important.
Okay. Just in the interest of time, at that point I asked him if he was ready to sign up and join, which he appreciated that I put him on the spot. But he did join, and in fact we spent the next couple of years working on it. He actually went on German TV and showed examples of his vision for how we might do that. But sadly, at the time, we were not successful in being able to model this particularly complex situation. But as you heard earlier, and I think you'll hear more about this tomorrow, we're finally going to address this in the MediTwin project. So the foundations were laid back in 2017 for the understanding to be able to do that. We couldn't do it then. absolutely believe we can do it now. And so this has been sticking with me for a long time, partly because, as you know, when I launched the project, or many of you know, I created a little concept video. You see a snapshot from that on the left, where I told the story of a young lady who was going through a very complex cardiovascular surgery. So she had a pediatric congenital heart defect, and the fear associated with that, and the complexity, and the idea of using the virtual twin was told. And I shared at that time that my inspiration of choice of telling the story through a child rather than through, say, an adult male, which would be more the typical patient for a heart surgery, was because of personal experience. And this was my daughter and her surgery that led me to understand the appreciation for what pediatric cardiologists have to do to keep them alive. And so that, of course, has been a personal theme. You saw a picture of my daughter. She's thriving, doing well. There's me on stage presenting it. Again, back in 2017, I'll let her voice. She lent her voice to a video that was filmed.
Said a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that is true in healthcare as much as anything. Each field moves at a certain time, but we believe that 3D technology is ready and that medicine will get the same benefits that we've seen in every other industry.
Instead of being afraid of going to the doctor and worrying about the future, I want to be that doctor. The best thing to do is take what you're given and be inspired by it.
So of course, that's a great inspiration, and as I mentioned, she has done that. She has become that doctor, and here she is at her graduation from being chief resident at Baylor College of Medicine Pediatric. And of course, being in Texas, you can see that the department are all wearing cowboy hats and created a song for her at her graduation, which was very exciting. So her inspiration continues to inspire me along the way. But the interesting thing, and one of the reasons I tell the story, is at the time when I talked about why I chose a young lady, I actually pointed out that I had thought about presenting it through the eyes of an older male patient, a typical male, but didn't tell that story. But today I am going to tell his story. And in many ways, it's thanks to my daughter, Jessie, I get to tell this story. And so it begins because he's a long-standing part of the Living Heart Project. He noticed something about his heart. And so what you see here, and some people have talked about sensors, so this is a metric that he was using to monitor his heart, being part of the project, very conscious of that. He noticed a very interesting pattern. So over the course of a couple of years, he noticed his heart rate his resting heart rate, which he recognized as a model for his overall base health of his cardiovascular system, would rise slowly, and then it would reach a point, maybe 10% higher, and he would say, okay, I have to now adjust my lifestyle, change my diet. He actually learned how to activate his sympathetic nervous system using the sensors, his parasympathetic nervous system, and was able to bring it down, but then life kicked in and it went back up. And what he didn't know at the time was he was actually suffering from something called, something having excess human growth hormone, which affects multiple things in his body. The cardiovascular system, being muscular, is activated, so the heart has to work harder, it gets thicker and heavier, the entire vascular system, and that's what he was seeing with his resting heart rate creeping up, was his vascular system was getting stiffer and thicker, and so his heart was having to work harder and faster just to be able to get the same amount of oxygen to his level. What he found out was actually that was being driven by this. an actual massive tumor that was in the center of his head. And it was my daughter who led to the diagnosis. In fact, he was looking at a cardiovascular system, but he also had some unrelated issues that were infections in his head, ear infections, eye infections, and because of her involvement in knowledge in the Living Heart Project, he contacted her, and she advised him to get a scan. As a researcher, she thought this is not normal, and this is what the scan showed. In fact, where his pituitary gland should have been was this massive tumor. And the pituitary gland was pretty well mashed. And you can see in this analysis that tumor was not only affecting the pituitary gland, but if you translate it over, and we just heard Joe talk about the vascular system and the optic nerve, it was penetrating right in the center of the brain where the optic nerve comes through to get to that visual cortex in the back of his head. And also, it was wrapped around, he showed the carotid arteries that feed the blood to the eye. And so miraculously, he was not blinded, but his vision was very much threatened. And so this is a diagram, and so certainly the work that we're doing on the living eye is not just theoretical work, and you can see how the pituitary gland and the optic chiasm comes through. This is in fact his blood flow, his carotid arteries going through that, and you can see if you look at it this way, where the tumor actually was at the crossroads of both of those, both of his optic nerves, what's called the optic chiasm, and wrapping around, so it was restricting all of that blood flow. So all of those those vascular threats that we're going to, that Joe talked about, were all very relevant to this issue. In fact, this is where the tumor was located. Here's another view, which looks a little bit like what he showed, and you can see how that tumor is in a very challenging place. And this is where my daughter's experience with the Living Heart Project really kicked in. She knew that to get access to that was going to be very challenging. It's right in the center of the head. And she felt that a 3D model of the head was going to be needed to be able to help navigate around those very careful structures to not leave him blind or affect other important structures of his body, possibly worse than blindness. And so he was suffering from motion constrictions, which Joe showed with the living eye, vascular restrictions. Those were all being threatened, exactly what we were seeing in the problems that we're looking at in the Living Eye Project. And so this is very relevant to the work we're doing, and Joe has shown some of this. And so, so this particular condition, excess human growth hormone, is something called acromegaly. In fact, that is the tumor. It causes skeletal changes, bone growth, neurological effects, soft tissue swelling, etc., cardiovascular. And in fact, in hindsight, he was suffering from all of these. And so the challenge here was, how do you get that tumor out? It was causing life-threatening condition. And as you can see, there's really just a couple of accesses. The most obvious one is through the front of the head to open it up, move the brain out of the way, get access to it. Very invasive. But she knew that using a virtual twin could actually allow him to use some other techniques, some non-invasive techniques, to actually go through the other portal, which is actually the nose. And so that's in fact what they did. So she identified a surgeon, Dr. Tom Beaumont, who was not only an expert in this particular kind of tumor, but an expert in using 3D models to be able to do that. And in fact, here you see a model of one of the models that he created. And he was able to perform surgery just this past July, remove that tumor successfully with 11 hours of surgery non-invasively, so using the virtual twin in the operating room as the reference for the surgery. So he couldn't see what he was doing. He had a camera to understand where he was, but the three-dimensional object was actually the virtual twin that he had in the operating room. And he used that to navigate around all of those microstructures. One mistake, and they could be absolutely disastrous for the patient. And in fact, this work was just mentioned in an article in the Washington Post. Some of you have seen that. And this is a quote from him that's in that article. And he talks about the importance of the 3D model in the operating room. The idea that he could focus on his technique, cell by cell, removing the tumor, avoiding every possible side effect that possibly could happen, with the idea that he could, instead of trying to remember the 3D structure, he could actually use the 3D structure in the operating room. And it was completely successful. It happened just a few weeks ago. And so I think this is a real testament to not just the power of 3D modeling, but the importance of this technology. And I'll share one other thing because we've talked a lot about the body being a system, so I'd share some additional data that I think you might find interesting. I apologize, this is a very rough graph. So this is something called heart rate variability. So we showed the resting heart rate. This is heart rate variability, which actually measures the body's response to change. So your sympathetic, parasympathetic response. And I share this because it shows how the body's a system, which we've talked about a lot. And what you see here is there's three discontinuities here. So the first thing was his diagnosis. And at the point of diagnosis, his heart rate variability had been pretty consistent. Then all of a sudden, no change to his medical condition, just his mental state, and his cardiovascular system suffered. So there was no change to him medically, but his heart was suffering as a result of just his diagnosis. Amazingly, at the point of the surgery, instantly picked back up. So even though his body had been through devastating surgery, by removing the vascular constrictions, all of a sudden his heart rate variability went right back up. And so you can actually see, you can trace what's happening in his body, and he used this as a way of managing his recovery. You see this oscillatory behavior. I will point out, at some point he had to return from work, and some of that good progress started to deteriorate as the real world kicked back in. And so this is certainly a message that we can improve health by being able to monitor it. But the important thing here, and we've heard this before, is this is a particular case where the virtual twin of the human, and I obviously use this as a case to emphasize that here's a condition where he had something going on with his brain, but it was affecting every organ in his body, his system in his body. And so while we know we have to focus on the individual's organs and get them right, we have to remember that the system is ultimately going to control the process. And again, this is a really telling example of how if we just focus on one piece, we're not going to get the full story. And he was very lucky to have the care that he got. And I share this partly because it chronicles my daughter's journey from patient to doctor. So she got to advise him and his family through this entire process, identify the right surgeon, points out the importance of what we've been talking about, treating the body as a system, and gives the patient view. And I'd like to be able to invite him up on stage to join me, but I can't because, as you probably figured out, this is my brain. And so this is a case, and I think Bernard said it well, we have to live this technology as we're going. I didn't want to live this technology necessarily, but I do. And I'm here today having had a golf ball size tumor removed from the center of my head that was threatening my life, thanks to 3D technology in the operating room that some of those early doctors and early visionaries hoped one day we could do. And certainly, I didn't know that I'd be here today, but I thank every one of you that's helped me be here today. Thank you. And so, just to conclude, I bring this picture back, and I wrote my conclusions because I wasn't sure I'd be able to say it. But to all the giants whose shoulders that I've stood upon to be able to bring to you the 10 years of this project, and to my colleagues that I've locked arms with to be able to peer and see the future that we've talked about so I could safely do it with those colleagues. I thank you, obviously, from the bottom of my heart, not for just what you've done to the project, but what you've done for all future generations.
I think, not only one word, it's courage. And as you said, it's resilience, and it's a thank you from everybody, and therefore, also the team wanted to thank you. You have built this fantastic community since 10 years, for all of us. You have been the catalyzer of this community, and therefore, the part of the community wanted to express its thanks to you for this 10 years anniversary.
Happy 10th anniversary Living Heart project. For me, this calls out 2 chapters. Chapter 1, before I arrived, it's all about Steve's personal story and how he gathered this vibrant ecosystem around him to deliver the first virtual twin of a heart. Then the second chapter I've contributed to write, and it's how you parameterize this model so that you can have now a cohort of diseased heart models, and then you can start doing things like running an in silico clinical trial on these virtual twins. Super proud that we have now published with FDA in August, just on time for our 10th anniversary. Awesome!
Happy 10th birthday Living Heart Project.
Happy 10th anniversary Living Heart Project. This is your operations manager speaking. You've been a love of mine since inception, from the signing of the first member all the way to the assembly of the international community we've become that spans the globe and encompasses hundreds of researchers, industry, regulatory, and clinical participants. I've been fortunate and deeply honored to engage with you and learn from you over these years to advance science, ultimately improving patient care. What an amazing journey it's been. Here's to many more years and expanding the scope to the entirety of the virtual human twin.
Happy birthday, Living Heart Project. It's been a pleasure to have been associated with this project from the start. It's been really inspiring to me, and I hope to be around for many, many more birthdays.
Happy 10th birthday to the Living Heart Project. I'm Tammy Ganem, and I've been providing legal support for the Living Heart Project from the day that Steve Levine and Tom Battisti brought me into this idea. I've done the participant agreements for the Living Heart participants, the license model agreements, I've created and negotiated those, and also have worked on the collaboration agreement with the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. all the strides that we have made with the Living Heart Project and its community, and the influence that it has had on the DS programs today, and even outside DS with our participant programs, has been one of the most satisfying journeys of my career here at DS. Here's to more years of the Living Heart Project.
Living Heart Project, I can't believe you're 10 years old. I remember you as a baby. I can't wait to see what else is coming.
Happy birthday, Living Heart Project. It's so good to work with all the members of the project, and I hope to work 10 more years with you guys. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Living Heart Project.
Happy birthday, Living Heart Project. Can't believe it's been 10 years since the beginning of this project, which started as one member and has now grown to over 450 contributing cardiovascular experts who are proving every day that computational modeling and simulation can translate research into clinical care. Kudos to everybody involved.
Happy birthday, Living Heart Project. About 10 years ago, I was involved very early on as a release manager for the Living Heart Project. It was so exciting to watch how this project grew and how it became such an integral part of DS's strategy in the future. I think part of what makes our software so exciting is things like this, that we get to see the impact throughout the industry. Happy birthday!
Wow, 10 years, what a journey. Remember 2014, this was a concept presented on stage by Steve, and now, well, we have a model, we have a community, more than 300 partners, reaching from industrial, researchers, regulators, and the physician. This did save already so many lives, and will continue to do so. 10 years, fantastic journey that we are just starting with all of you together. Thanks a lot to Steve Levine, Tom Battisti, Zheng Yao, Philippe Guillou, Ashley Mastersons, April Davy, and so many others that contributed to what it is today and what it will be tomorrow. Fantastic, and this is really saving life. This is the future of medicine, this is the future of life sciences, and a fantastic demonstration of the virtual human twin. Thank you to everybody, looking forward to the future.
So on behalf of the entire community, thank you, Steve Levine.